Um, Train is on time. This one is going to take an hour, I would think.
Yeah.
This is a serious, long
Yeah.
discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, implications for a lot of different facets of the district. Robert?
All right, give me a second. How's that? Is that good? Well, what I'd like to do is start with just a little background on why I am standing here in front of you. And so I'm going to run through a background and then invite some of our consultants up here to give you a little more detail about the tests we've done. So the background is this summer in June, we were planning to replace the gym floor at Hilton Head Island School for the Creative Arts. We started that work, we had bid out the work, contracted it out, and when the contractor got in there to actually start the demo work, they asked us the question, have you tested this floor for mercury? When that question came up, we were unaware of any issues and did not kind of ask why would we test the floor for mercury. So that sent us down an investigation of what are the causes with mercury and what is the involvement with gym floors. And what we found out was that in other states they have found issues with a certain type of gym floor and the presence of mercury in the air. What that type of gym floor is a poured gym floor. So what it is a solid piece of rubber for the most part. It was installed between 1960 to 1990. And what occurs is that the floor was actually done almost like you do cement. It was a slurry, it was put down, it was hardened, and it's a solid piece. So we have lots of other rubber floors throughout the district, but even some new ones that have been done in the last 3 years, but those are sheet goods. So those are put out as a slim sheet, and they're actually adhered together. So one of the telltale signs is if you see seams. So if you see seams, there's nothing to worry about. If it's one solid piece of rubber over the entire gym, that is the issue. So after that, the flooring subcontractor asked if they could test for the presence of mercury. We gave them that permission. They did the test, came back and said it was positive. Finding that out, we then had to see what the next step was. So this proved that there was actually mercury presence in the floor. Now the thing is about mercury, once you look into it, the solid is not the issue. The main issue is mercury vapor. So, and what causes mercury vapor? It's kind of like water and steam. At a certain temperature, to create steam, you add temperature to water, water boils and lets off vapor. It's the same thing with mercury, other than that temperature is much lower. You do not have to apply heat for it to release and go into a vapor. And that vapor is what is the concern, more than ingestion or more, and as a solid. You may be familiar with mercury. There are regulations about it in fish and fish that you should not eat and whatnot. Our bodies do have a way of processing mercury, but they still have limits. The higher issue of concern, more than the solid, is the actual vapor and inhalation. So we at that point, we brought on our indoor air quality consultants. That's Terracon. We have a existing contract with them, and we asked them to give us a protocol for testing mercury. As part of that, they then developed a protocol, and luckily this is coming out of the Charleston office. Terracon is a large national firm, and they actually had offices in Texas that had already dealt with this issue. So, and as far as we know, there have been limited issues in the state of South Carolina. One of the things we did reach out to was DHEC. DHEC is not responsible for indoor air quality, so they do not get involved with that. We also reached out to the Office of School Facilities. They were not familiar with that. So what we had to use was some guidance from some other states. There's a handful of states out there with guidance on how to deal with mercury in gym floors. Probably the one that is the most, who's done the most work is the state of Minnesota. So, and they have the most stringent guidelines. So that is what we used as our guide and the protocols that they used on how to test the floor. So what Terracon did at that point is they then collected samples at SCA. And they did find the samples, and they came up with a protocol. Let me stop and go back there. And what the protocol was they were going to do a test with the air running, and then we were going to turn the air off for a time period, do a test again, and then turn the air back on and do a third test. This was kind of based on their experience they had had in other states, that the air conditioning actually does have an impact on the levels of mercury in the air. And so upon completing that test, it was found that SCA did have mercury vapor presence in the air that were lower than, with the air running for the most part, that were lower than any of the standards out there as far as being a concern. There are some standards that have short-term exposure and long-term exposure. The state of Minnesota has the most stringent for short-term exposure, and the EPA has a level of 1,000 short-term for the, I'll let them get into the actual, what that number means. I'll just throw it out there for now. That levels of 1,000, it's actually nanograms per meter cubed. I'll let them answer those questions. And the state of Minnesota is 750 nanograms per meter cubed. Our levels got higher than that with the air off. And now what we did find is after you turn the air back on, all levels went well below, for the most part, what is the most stringent standard out there, and that is for short-term exposure. We're under all levels, I'm sorry, that's long-term exposure. I said that backwards. I apologize. So those are the long-term exposure levels. For the EPA, that level of 1,000, and actually Jim's putting that up there right now, that level of, you don't have the EPA level up there, I see, but the 3,000 is the EPA ASTDR, which I'll let them get into. I'm trying to, I don't want to get bogged down into this. I guess the main point here is that with the air on, we were below any level of concern. With the air on, we rose above some of the most stringent levels of concern. Turn the air back on again, everything dropped again. We also asked them to do tests around the gym area, and as you left the gym area, all levels dropped off pretty dramatically, pretty quickly. So that tells us that the only concern for the most part was in the gym. Following that, we did some discussions about, and lucky for us, this was all found in the summer. I think the results were towards the end of the June. There was some summer school going on, but for the most part, when this was discovered, we're going into July, and we had no students in the building. So lucky for us, we had a little time. So kind of internally, the discussion was before we do any type of public report, we really need to understand what's going on and find out if there are any other locations as well. So based on that, we looked at where we might possibly have this floor, and that got more complicated than we thought. Partially because not all the floors are exposed anymore. So what we had to do is go back and look at, from historical knowledge, from drawings, where had we ever had rubber, not just where have you seen it. So from that, we had 4 that we were concerned about. Of those 4, 3 of them had the actual rubber floor. And what we had to do was actually, they had gym floors over the top of them. Had to go through the wood floor to go below to see was there still rubber under that, that wood floor. So the locations where we did find that to be tested were Robert Smalls International Academy, Buford Middle, and Islands Academy here in this building. So based on those 3, we did that, went back to that test, asked them to do a sample of the actual floor. It came back positive, saying yes, mercury is in that floor. And then we did the air samples. So, and that is the report that you do see in front of you, showing what the air samples were. And I'm going to stop right there, if I can, and bring up Terracon. And I believe Andy is going to join us. Andy Rowland from Terracon. And Craig Langford is also here. He's the one that actually conducted the test. And I'm going to ask Andy if he'll do a little introduction of himself. You want to do that? And then go over the results with you.
Thank you. My name is Andy Rowland. I'm with Terracon, as Robert said. We are a national engineering, materials testing, geotechnical, and environmental firm. At Terracon, I serve as the national manager for all of our industrial hygiene services. So I have 20 certified industrial hygienists situated throughout the country who answer to me. On a personal note, my wife of 32 years has been a school teacher in Charleston County for 32 years, and our daughter has now been a school teacher in Berkeley County for 4 years. Child health is obviously very important in my life. I also served as the program director for the Medical University of South Carolina's program in environmental health sciences for 12 years and served on the faculty there at MUSC. So we don't get the call unless it's something yucky and scary, and that is certainly the case here. So mercury, I think we're mostly familiar with it from an industrial hygiene standpoint. It is a systemic poison. And some of you may be seasoned enough as myself to have busted open a thermostat back in the day, back in your dad or your uncle's shop or whatever, and we saw its cool qualities at room temperature. I highly recommend against that now. I'm a father of 3, and I'm an uncle to 22, and I'm a godfather to 6. And I wouldn't hope that any of them would repeat a lot of my life's mistakes, and that would be one of them. So we did our sampling, and obviously the material, this gymnasium floor material, which was installed in these facilities, some in the early 70s and some in the early 80s. The mercury is added to, one question that comes up is, why the heck would you put mercury in a material that you're going to put inside of a building? We could ask that question of a lot of different building products. It's there because it gives this sort of rubberized finish where it has a little give, and it actually makes for a pretty darn good gymnasium floor. So we know that mercury is in the product itself, so then the question becomes, is that substance, mercury, emanating into the air? Do we have off-gassing going on? And mercury within a floor system like this can indeed off-gas. It basically moves into a vapor state, and inhalation would be the route of entry of concern here. So we put together a sampling scheme. We use a handheld device, a Jerome device, that actually gives us a reading of the concentration of mercury in the air. What we're concerned about with any toxin is the dose that one receives. And the dose that one receives is based on 2 primary factors: the concentration at which they are being exposed and the length of time that they're being exposed to that concentration. Does that make sense to everybody? It's kind of like, and this is an analogy that's wearing thin these days because nobody knows what an old single reflex camera looks like, where you actually had to do 2 things, right? We had to set the shutter speed, and we had to do these 2 combinations. What is the concentration of light that's going to come in from the aperture, and what's the period of time that it's going to be exposed? Well, doses of any type of a particular contaminant are sort of analogous to that. So one thing that we can measure right off the bat is the concentration at which people are being exposed. And so we have to look for a reference. And so we go digging for a reference. So we look at OSHA to say, OSHA, do you have an occupational concentration at which you don't want to expose anybody above? And then we look for other learned and established entities like the National Institutes of Health, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, the ACGIH, which is the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. I'm a member of that committee as a certified industrial hygienist. And we look to see what they have set as so-called safe standards. And ACGIH's standard for this, just so you know, which is always very, very, very conservative, is 25 micrograms of mercury per cubic meter of air. We are at a fraction of that number, even when we turned the AC off and concentrations began to rise. So my rule of thumb in my life as a certified industrial hygienist is, would I put my children in the school? Would I be happy with my daughter teaching 5th grade, as she'll do this year at her elementary school in Goose Creek? Would I be perfectly happy and feel comfortable with them teaching in that setting? Or would I be perfectly happy with my little 5-year-old grandnephew, Miles? Would I be happy with him sitting in a desk in that classroom and learning this year that's coming up? And the short answer to all that is yes. There's no indication in any of the data that we've seen so far that would give me any reason to be anxious. The trouble is, that's a hard thing to explain sometimes to the general public. You know, if you tell somebody you've got just a little bit of Legionella in your cooling tower water, that's a hard thing to explain, because most of us want 0 parts per billion of Legionella in our cooling tower water, and we want no parts per billion. We want no micrograms per cubic meter of mercury in our air. The trouble is, those are not achievable in any practical matter, and we can have these levels in there and anticipate no adverse outcome in the end. So mercury's present in that product. We do know that that product is off-gassing and releasing some mercury vapor. We have sampled the mercury vapor, and it's at or below. It's below. The most important one for me, because I know how ACGIH arrives at their numbers, and their number is 25. And you notice that we're like 1/25th of that in most of our samples. And so what the conclusion that I arrive at is there's no reason for immediate concern or panic. The science is what the science is. And so we've collected our samples. We did it in a defendable fashion. And about a third of my time is spent doing expert witness work where these things unfortunately move to the next phase. And to put it short and sweet, I'd be perfectly comfortable defending the science that we've put together on this particular case. I know other questions are going to pop up, like, why did we put it in the first place? That's difficult to answer. I wasn't here when you put it in 40 years ago. It was considered the state-of-the-art material at the time. And then another question I think your constituents, your parents are going to ask is, well, when are you getting it out? And I think that's going to be a question for the board to take up at its own pace. Where's Robert? Want me to take questions or?
Yeah. Let me ask
Sure.
a question before and I'm talking about this building. This school was built back in the 70s.
Yes,
So 70, yeah. So what effect that would
74
have on
was.
students that went to this school until the time it was closed?
Well, one of the things, and I'll let Andy jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as we've been able to find, there are no known cases of mercury poisoning from gym floors. Is that
Correct.
so? What we're talking about are precautionary levels. I don't know. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, we can find no treatise or learned document that's been produced that shows a correlation between the mercury in gymnasium floors and a resulting adverse health effect. Here's the way your question, of course, I don't know what the samples were 4 months ago, and I certainly don't know what the samples would look like 32 years ago. But here's the way that these standards are set. This is why I say the ACGIH, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, this is why it's so important. When they say that 25 micrograms of mercury per cubic meter of air is a safe level, what they mean by that is that Joe Smith could go to his work site and work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year for a 30-year career and anticipate no adverse outcome being exposed at that level. So I suspect the answer to your question is we probably haven't had any adverse effects from it. That is, if the mercury vapor levels have been about the same. Most things off-gas much more rapidly, like you get the new carpet in your homeroom class and it smells. You get a new car and you pay an extra $3,000 for the new car smell. That's volatile organic compounds off-gassing. Mercury just happens to off-gas for a very long time, and in this case, 40 years or more. So I would anticipate no adverse outcome from any of your students on the science that we have so far.
Peduncle, Sanderson, Allen, and Dr. Claus.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell,
I'll let you hold mine.
and thank you for coming down. Is there a continuous air monitor for mercury that we could put in the gymnasiums that should something happen, it starts off-gassing at some unregular amount, that cam would give us a alert to alert the gym teacher, to alert the administration to evacuate the building and exit out of there?
Yes. The short answer to your question is yes, there is a mechanism for that. You can set it up. We can actually observe it from remote on our website. You can set it up to give an alarm at a certain level. Shy of that, something that might be more, might be a little less expensive, might be that we set up a periodic surveillance on our calendar. We say, hey, every 3 months or whatever it is that we all agree upon, we're going to return to each of these areas of concern, and we're going to take samples, and then we'll put that into the database. But yeah, if you wanted to do it continuously, we have all sorts of instruments that we can use, and not only monitor it consistently, but also see it from remote and get an alarm. I can get a text that tells me that the pressure differential is incorrect at a building in Dallas, Texas. The other part I think that dovetails into your question is, what will our policy be? We know that we see elevations if the air conditioning system turns off, that concentrations begin to rise. And that's simply because dilution is no longer occurring. Everybody understand that? That makes sense. I would suggest in this case, I asked Robert, I said, what is your policy if the AC is out and it's, you know, the first week in September and it's 1,000,000 degrees outside and 1,000,000% relative humidity? What do you do? Well, we would typically try to bring in some temporary type of cooling devices or fans. I said, well, maybe in the case of these areas, maybe it's our policy that you cease use of the areas. And so there's administrative ways that we can fix this. But yes, we can do precisely what you just asked.
If I can just jump in, and there are some states, is this picking up now?
Yes.
Okay. There are some states that have set levels for testing, and they're broken up a little different, but for the most part, we're under those levels that they have set, where they'd say no more testing needed, period.
Okay.
So we would be going an extra step if we did, like Andy's suggesting, you know, doing like a quarterly test or some periodic measure that we just make sure that we're maintaining the same levels. Because I think it's pretty safe to say, you know, the impacts are temperature, and as long as you're maintaining the correct temperature and whatnot, there shouldn't be any dramatic changes. I mean, it may fluctuate a little bit, but we're not expecting a spike of any kind on a normal
So with
situation.
something like that, and I skimmed the report, you know, it talks about, you know, making sure that the AC's run prior to. I mean, we could just program it just to, instead of doing energy conservation at
That's
night,
exactly correct.
we're just gonna, it's gonna be 70 whatever
I mean,
degrees in there.
you're already,
That's the conversation we just had already.
yeah, you're talking about what we're thinking is when we run our air conditioning settings, we run them for comfort and some bit of energy efficiency.
Right.
For these gyms now, the energy
gonna go safety.
efficiency is out of the question for the most part. You're now doing for ventilation and comfort.
And then, you know, I look at the 4 schools. Can you just tell me how we determined or found out which schools may have that floor in there?
Well, like I said, there a lot of it was historical information. When we started looking around, you know, we pretty much said, well, we don't see any out there.
Right.
And people would say, well, I remember years ago there used to be one of those floors at Buford Middle. And we're like, well,
Right.
so that's
I
where we
guess-
said, well, we better go look back there and see if it's underneath the wood floor. And
Right.
that's how we
Do
found
you
it.
have a list of the schools that you checked, that you said, you know what,
Yes.
maybe, it's
I mean,
like,
I can tell you right now, so we did check outside of the 3 we located, well, 4 with Hilton Head School for Creative
right.
Arts. We also thought we might have had it at Hilton Head Middle School, but we actually went under that wood floor and it was concrete. There was no rubber floor underneath
okay.
it.
And I'm just thinking, Mossy Oaks off the top of my head, the old gymnasium, which is now classroom space. I remember that floor being rubber, but I was this tall, so.
We'll be
maybe I was-
glad to go back and check that, because it has BCT over it now for
Right.
the most part, so.
And to that point, in the gym that we split and made some classrooms on top of a portion of it,
That's in Islands Academy, yes.
that has VCT, vinyl composition tile over it, and there we tested and we got zeros across the board, which is just evidence that putting something over it does radically decrease the concentrations in that area.
And I'd like to commend you too on speaking at a layperson's level of being able to explain that mercury stuff. Sometimes I deal with IH who's kind of way up here. I'm like, can you click it down 2 notches for me? But I mean, this is
I
very
tell people I'm not
understandable and
normal, but
understandable.
I am the most normal CIH you'll ever meet.
So, thank you, and I mean, I feel confident in the product that you've delivered here based on your report and your presentation. So I appreciate you coming down today.
Thank you.
Ms. Anderson?
So we keep talking about the air and the air, but it does turn to cool. So what happens when, do you just mean the air movement? Because what happens when we use heat?
Right.
It-
Yeah, we'll have to look for that, and that would be a spot that we would definitely want to hit in our periodic sampling. So off-gassing, or the evaporation process, is indeed correlated. It correlates to the temperature inside the room. You may remember in some schools, they would say back in the day that we've got the smell of the new carpet is so obnoxious we can't go, and we would bake the school. We would crank the heat up in the middle of the summertime and try to accelerate that evaporation process. So when we change over to the winter months and we're bringing the temperature back up to keep people comfortable inside, that would be another logical target that we would want to hit for sampling. A sample in mid-August does not represent necessarily exactly what you'll see in mid-January.
Right.
And we may keep those temperatures down even in the winter. We may try to maintain 68 to, yeah.
And my other questions, Mr. Dunkel happened to mention, because I was thinking about if there was a monitor, like a carbon monoxide monitor, so we took care of that. And then my other concern was, as Mr. Dunkel brought up, Mossy Oaks, where classrooms have been built over that, and then Islands Academy, I believe the
Yes.
majority of that is
Yeah.
built over, or if not all, a
3
gym.
classrooms.
Okay.
3.
So, but we've kind of covered that as well, so, I think that we definitely need to look at monitoring, especially those areas where classrooms have been built over.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ms.
it's presently showing 0. No,
Okay.
Well,
Readings.
I'm just concerned about when we're turning on the heat, what's gonna happen.
Mr. Dowling?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive my layman's terminology. Is there any data or prognostication anyway as this material ages, the rate of vapor release will fluctuate down or up?
I don't have that data, but everything is disintegrating as we speak, including you and I, Mr. Dowling.
That's for sure.
I do have to say, if I can jump in, I think one report I saw gave it a half-life of 16 years. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, it's typically it's ramped up at the beginning and it begins to dissipate at the end of its life. The fact that it's been where it's been for as long as it has means that it's had a very good life cycle. With VCT or something like that, we hope to get 10 or 12 years. With some of these materials, we've already gotten 4 decades of use out of them. I'm not aware of any study that's been done to the point that you just asked. I haven't seen it yet. And I think we're on the cusp. Those of you who've been around for a while, if you were around the summer of '88 when the asbestos AHERA regulation came out, we were sort of at the beginning. We know so much more about that topic now in hindsight, and I suspect with mercury there's a lot to be learned too in the decades to come.
Thank you.
Mr. Scrivenger?
Yeah, most of my concerns have been answered, but is there an event that could occur that would cause a burst, if you know what I mean, like a spill, or is there something we need to guard against as opposed to the gradual air?
Yeah, and we can use the asbestos analogy here. in this particular case. Yeah, we would want it written into our maintenance, official standard operating procedures and maintenance activities, that we don't cut, abrade, that we don't sand, that we don't use a buffer with a certain grit, because we don't want to disrupt the material, because we would then in that case accelerate. Again, the analogy with asbestos works well here. If it's left undisturbed, the level of exposure will be de minimis. It will be just infinitesimally small. But yeah, there are stupid things that we could do that we, as we have done, and with asbestos and other materials in the schools, unfortunately, that we need to guard against by written standard operating procedures and forbidding people from undertaking those kinds of activities.
And then there's also an accidental event, like a spill.
Yeah.
Or something, and I understand the stupid events.
Yeah.
I'm actually, have a master's degree in that.
And stupid events. They did not offer that one.
But yeah, I was also thinking about spills and things like that, you know, caustic material
Well,
on
now
the
the floor
floor.
is a solid. It's not gonna spill. I mean, it,
No, if we spilled something
mercury,
on
yes.
the
That-
floor
yeah.
that would cause a reaction,
oh, I got you.
you know, then we'd want to prohibit, you know,
Yeah.
take acid into the gym, you know.
Yeah, the good news
You
is.
can't have a chemistry class over top of that floor.
Yeah, no chemistry there. The good news is we've had these materials in place, and they're pretty darn good
They're
shape.
in pretty good shape. Yeah,
They
they've taken a lot
perform.
of-
They would get a, they would get a 10 in the durability rating for gymnasium floor materials.
Mrs. Dr. Ward?
Thank you very much, both of you, for the presentation. It was really good. One thing that struck me looking at your report, Andy, is that under the normal HVAC operations, all 4 floors, are roughly emitting the same amount of mercury vapor, or very small amounts. But yet, when you turned off the HVAC, it changed dramatically. Although it's still, as you pointed out, in an acceptable, non-alarming range or anything. But do you have an explanation for that? Other than obviously it probably has to do with the composition initially and exactly maybe when it was installed. But I assume you also probably noticed that like Beaufort Middle was more than 4 times as high without the HVAC on, whereas Robert Smalls was only about twice as high.
Right.
So I'm just curious, could you address that, please?
Yeah, the HVAC, the increase there's 2 primary factors that are in play. One is we turn off the HVAC system, and the ambient temperature inside the area will tend to increase. As the ambient temperature increases, the rate of evaporation increases. So now, for starters, as the place warms up when the HVAC is off, it's getting warmer, so the rate of evaporation is going up. Secondarily, when we have the HVAC on, we have a certain percent of makeup air that's coming in and diluting the concentration of material in the air. So both of those 2 things working in our favor, keeping it cool so that the rate of evaporation is slow, and keeping makeup air coming so that we're diluting, both of those things are gone when you turn the HVAC off. And so it's not surprising, but at first glance, the numbers will get your attention, that's for sure.
Yeah, so it could be actually where the gym is located in the building, like if it was an outside wall or something like that, where it would
Absolutely.
heat more, get more heat there,
Yeah.
or whatever.
And landscaping could have an effect on that. Is there a shade tree over the windows or not? And that will affect the rate of temperature increase.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
Dr. Smalls?
Since we're checking on the floors, did anyone check the gym floor at one of the older schools in Beaufort County gym, and that's St. Helena, because that used to be a high school gym. In addition to the gym, there is a building next door that's also part of the original school built in 1954. So did anybody look at those floors and see?
Well, as far as we know, the St. Helena gym did not have a rubber floor under it. Recognize the period is the 60s to the 90s, so that's the time. So if it's 54 would not be a
1954,
concern.
Right.
And as far as we know, or that I've heard, this material was pretty much only used in gyms or some kind of athletic activity
Right.
for its, its sponginess. So I've not heard of this type of floor being, I don't know, have you heard any instances where this floor has been anywhere else other than a gym?
No, it's typically in some sort of athletic setting where it can take a little bit out of the guys who ergonomics is part of industrial hygiene, and the guys who specialize in that particular field, they like a rubberized floor underneath athletes when they're running and turning and stopping, and it does mitigate somewhat trauma and broken bones and that kind of stuff. So that's the only place I've ever seen it.
When
Is
the
in-
new gymnasium flooring was put in at Buford Middle School, you did the testing at that time
yeah.
and found out that there was an issue?
No, I mean, we just now did the testing last week for the most part at Buford Middle School. When we put the wood floor over the top of the existing floor, and actually Buford Middle School, looking at the history, has had several layers of floor that have been put over that gym. But one of those is this rubber floor that we're talking about. It was actually not the original floor, but one that I believe was done in the 80s. Is a rubber floor that is a poured rubber floor.
And so how many schools in Beaufort County, if I may ask, have been tested? All?
We
Or was
we
this
have
a
been
random sample?
as far as testing, we have tested the 4. We did investigate underneath Hilton Head Island Middle School because we had heard it could be rubber. We went underneath and it was a concrete floor, so that was not a concern. But the 4 we tested were SCA, Hilton Head School for Creative Arts, Buford Middle, Robert Smalls, and Islands Academy here in this building.
Thank you.
And this is the oldest,
Sit
1974.
down, Linda.
Thank you. While I sat here and thought about it, think back to when I used to have CFLs in my house before I switched over to LEDs, and I remember when those broke, I would go through and shut the door, shut the AC off, open the windows up, and turn the fan on and let it blow out. And do you have an opinion on or research or data to back up of what a CFL and say a 300 square foot bedroom broken, what that air level, just to almost bring that down into someone's home? This is what you already have in your home, and if you break a CFL, your levels go to this for so long, which are less or more than what's currently in our gymnasium.
Yeah, that analogy has been drawn. I can't quote you the numbers.
Right.
I keep a lot of worthless material in my noggin,
Right.
as my wife would tell you. But I can't say that I recall that. But yeah, that modeling has been done because we're always looking for analogous events to people can
It's
relate
easier to
to, because
explain
we've all
sometimes.
broken a light bulb.
Right.
And that's something I could get for you if you're curious. It's
So-
out there.
Do you or Robert, do you have a recommendation, or do you need the board to take any action, or is this just really delivering on the results of what we asked you to do already and bringing us the results?
Kind of, it's a combination, I guess, because I'm delivering you the results.
Right.
I know, and Mr. Foster can come up here and talk about it, we have, for the most part, a publicity campaign to make sure we get out educational materials to the parents and make sure they're aware of that. So I'll ask him to come up here in a second. But we are going to make a decision. Right now, we're not in a hurry, I would say, because as you may have heard me mention before, we do not want to do anything during the school year.
Correct.
If we could cover the floor prior, those that aren't covered. So right now, you're talking about Islands Academy and Hilton Head School for the Creative Arts. If you decided that you would like to cover these floors and leave them in place and continue monitoring, we could do that within a couple months for the most part. We'd have to order materials and get that lined up. But if the decision is of this board that you would like to remove the floors, that could not happen until the summer. We don't need to do that type of work with kids in the building. So when the building's shut down in the summer, we could do that if that is what is decided.
So I guess for us to, or at least for me to make that decision, I'd need to see numbers. If it's, I don't know, if it's $100,000 per building, to me it's like, yeah, it's a no-brainer, we'll do it this summer. If it's $1 million per building to replace the floor, then it says, well, maybe we can't do it this summer. So do you have something?
Well, I can give you.
Or could you bring us?
Yeah, let me tell you what I know now.
Okay.
We first start with just replacing the floor with a new floor. Let's say we just put a floor on top.
So overlaying.
Yeah, overlay. At SCA, we were looking somewhere in the range of about $75,000 to do that. So that cost is there no matter what you do. You're going to end up putting a floor back.
That per school?
That would be per floor, yes. What I have heard in other locations where they've removed the floor, just the floor, you're talking in the 80, and I'll, Terracon, jump in here if I'm off, in the 80,000 to 100,000 type range to remove the floor. Now, what I have also seen though is Burlington Township in New Jersey's got a pretty good website. One of the things they've talked about is they removed the floor, and upon removing the floor, the levels of mercury went higher. And so what they did then had to do was remove the concrete, and there was still presence of mercury. After that, they had to move the rock and the soil underneath.
Right.
So if you
And
go,
that's where I don't want to go. I don't want to
if
go
you
down the
I
rabbit
was about to
hole.
say, if you go to that level, now I do not know a price, and I can tell you it's a lot more than $100,000.
So it would be
And-
safe to say to overlay and replace, assuming you don't have to replace concrete or replace the dirt or replace the earth in its entirety. I mean, $1 million would cover it for all 4 schools. Would that be a big
Nope.
budget that would most likely cover it?
Till I heard of having to remove the concrete and everything underneath, that's kind of what I'm talking about, because you're
Right.
about 150,000 per school with just floor and removal of that layer. Islands Academy is a little bit different.
Mhm.
You have a wall, you have classrooms. I would, if I just, it would be quite a bit more expensive than that at Islands Academy. Let's
Right.
just say that, because you would have to tear down that wall, you'd have to tear everything out, you'd have to rebuild it, you'd have to, for the most part, demolish 3 classrooms, replace the floor, and then if you decided to rebuild 3 classrooms.
It-
That
it-
would be quite an undertaking.
And to me, it's, you just need to do that risk hazard analysis. If we're seeing zeros in Islands Academy where we have already covered the floor up, we cover the floor up so well, so we get zeros. We remind people not to drill there. Don't have active science fair projects going on in there. That the risk to have the hazard happen has been mitigated. And so now it's, almost like you would do an asbestos abatement. You just leave it in place, just secure it, don't disturb it, let it be.
Yeah, if I could comment on that as well. In our business, and the ladies who did the risk management talk before us did a great job in their business as well. We make decisions most of the time based on hard science. But sometimes we must make decisions also in consideration of soft science, like the perception of a risk, right? You have constituents, you have parents in the district who, no matter how many people stood up and said there's not a reason to be alarmed, their insistence would be, fire some teachers and take that money and get the darn mercury out of the building. That's just a fact of life. And so from a hard science standpoint and from an industrial hygiene standpoint, you don't have any reason to remove these flooring systems. I would say out of an abundance of caution, you could encapsulate them by putting another layer over them, and then you document that it's there, and we know upon demolition, then we will address the issues regarding getting it out of there. We're deferring a little bit. It's kind of like we got a loan with a balloon payment at the end of it. But if we have buildings that have long life expectancies that you're going to intend to get another 15, 20 years out of, I would say there's nothing that scientifically tells us we need to do anything right now. But if you wanted to act out of an abundance of caution, I would seal it up with another floor system over it. You may have another building that you say, man, it's at its life's end, and we plan on taking it down 2 summers from now. Well, then there might be other considerations to take it into account. So you got to look at the life plan for the building. How many years do we have left? But the hard science says we're not really compelled to do anything. But if we wanted to do something out of an abundance of caution, it would be to seal it up with another flooring system over it, in my opinion. First, do no harm, right? By tearing the floor up, you can actually cause a bigger problem than you have.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate the scientific background that you've given us. However, sitting in the audience now, we have 3 of our principals that are involved in this process here, and 1 parent that's very active in our schools. School opening is just around the corner. What you've given us this morning is a lot of good evidence, a lot of good situations that we could use to reduce the off gas and all that. But when these parents and kids come to school next week, we need to have something for our 3 principals sitting here that they can let the parents know in regard to what's going on. Is it safe for my child to be in this school? They don't have time to go through a long scientific explanation, which is a good explanation that you have given us this morning. They need something they can tell their parents that we are working on this problem. Your child is not in any harm. And so what I'm hearing right now, 2 situations that we could help. Monitoring and also making sure that our AC levels are where they need to be to reduce any off-gas exposure. So what I'm looking for is Mr. Foster getting with you guys and the principals so they can have, if this comes up, the first day or 2, a week of school, that these principals that are sitting here today can have a statement that they can give to their parents and constituents that their schools are safe for our youngsters to be in. And I think that's why they're here, because they want to know, what can I say to my parents? What can I say to my district constituents that my school is safe for my teachers, my staff, and my kids?
Now, if there are no other technical questions, Mr. Foster can answer those, but we can stay up here, I'd say, and answer any other technical questions. And then we can hand it over to Mr. Foster to answer the communication side.
Yeah, and we are at your disposal to do precisely that. Some of you may remember a few Christmases ago, the folks in Northside Elementary in Colleton County did not get to go back to school because of a mold issue. Craig and I were the culprits who came in and said, you got to get out of the building, it's not safe. Because in that situation, it failed my test. Would I put my child in the school? Would I have my wife teach in room 101? And the answer was no in both accounts. And so that led to a strong informational campaign that we had to undertake. And we're happy to help you with that as well.
Good. Thank you very much.
Darling?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Robert, this may seem like an obvious question, but is an overlay 100% seal or encapsulation?
No, and that may be a better question for Andy, actually. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, if we say that we have, in the industrial hygiene world, if we say that we have enclosed something, that term means something special to us. It means that we have sealed it up 100%. It's a permanent fixture and it's airtight. Putting a layer of 12 by 12 VCT does not meet that strict definition. However, it does mitigate the process of evaporation dramatically. Because as you know, only a small fraction of the total surface area would actually have openings to the room above, little imperfections, places where mastic might not have stuck perfectly, that kind of stuff. All the data tells us it still dramatically. So we're already at safe levels. If we put the VCT over to some other product, we probably could get to pretty darn close to 0. And remember, we're measuring things, guys, in when you talk about nanograms, a nanogram is one trillionth, right? Micrograms are 1 billionth, I should say. And so if somebody tells you that something has so many parts per billion, I'll give you another analogy for that. 1 part per billion is analogous to 1 second of time over a 32-year period. That's analogous for how small 1 part per billion is. And we're measuring things in the billionth and trillionth range. So it's very, very minuscule.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, folks.
Yeah, I just had a question. Does our insurance carrier have any opinion on this?
We have not,
I would check with, just
we have
make
not
sure that they're.
communicated anything with the
Right.
insurance carrier. That is something we can do, yes.
Yeah, just ask them, because they have a bunch of risk managers
Yes.
who'll reaffirm what we've heard. They would make
You're
a better
thinking about a
decision
class
than I
action.
would.
I'm going to hand it off to you. Any other technical questions?
Mrs. Cordray, you have a question?
Well, it's not really a question. I was thinking about whether or not we needed to whether I wanted to make a motion that we, do what you've described, which is to have those spaces cooled to the appropriate level, or whether you're just gonna do that on your own, and whether or not we needed to have a motion that would say that we wanted the quarterly testing to happen over the course of the year, because personally, that was something I'd like to see the testing. I don't know if quarterly is the right time, but, at least when we change from air conditioning to heat, or, you know,
Kind of the questions out there, the question on whether or not we'll change the HVAC system, in my mind, that's a non-starter.
do that
We're gonna
regardless.
do that no matter what you say.
and the testing, is the testing.
No, I
going-
shouldn't say that, yeah. I'm gonna do that no matter what is decided here.
No, I get you. So
Yeah.
you don't need a motion to do that,
Right.
and you don't need what about the, testing that would occur?
So the questions are going forward. So we have at least a year here that we know we're going to have to leave these in place. And the question is whether we overlay it or whether long-term you want to remove them. And if you're leaving them all in place with or without overlaying, yes, what kind of testing protocol do we want going forward? And as far as that goes, I'd work with Terracon to give us their recommendation. It sounds like a quarterly or semi-annually is what they're discussing. We'll do what they say is in our best interest.
Well, so personally, I'd like for them to give us a recommendation on testing, and I would like us to, consider the overlay process.
Mary, I would support a motion on the overlays for the capital improvement
So,
ASAP.
I'll make a motion, or a motion that covers both things, I think.
My opinion on ongoing monitoring, I would recommend that we set it up as periodic monitoring. We can set things up and collect samples on a 24-hour basis. Then we end up with more data points than we ever care to ever read, and it is rather expensive. It's usually more than adequate just to have a periodic calendar set up that says every other month or every 3 months or every 6 months. In the case of asbestos, the schools are compelled to reassess every 6 months. If we were doing something more stringent than that, that would be more than adequate. We could do it either way, but I would suggest that we just do it periodically.
Then my motion would be that we conduct periodic testing until the overlay floors are completed.
Second.
In the process of,
Microphone, please.
in the process of monitoring, can we have set times, like maybe 4 times a year, with using something like a smoke detector that can also detect rayon? Do you have detectors such as that?
We have a handheld instrument that measures for mercury vapor right on the spot and gives you an answer. So what I would recommend is you say that we're going to do it once every 3 months or whatever, the first Friday in this month, and that month, whatever it is. We just get it chiseled in stone so we know when it's going to be.
Agreed. And I would like to pretty much add that to
Okay.
your motion
All right,
if it's,
all right. Is that
not
a motion
already-
and a second? Any more discussion? You ready to vote? Everybody voted?
Yep.
Whoever voted. Who? No, okay. Didn't close. Huh?
The motion carries unanimously.
All right, Mr. Foster?
There was are you making a second motion?
That was
No,
all.
that was it, that was it.
Oh, that's both, okay.
Because it was that we would test until the
Overlay.
overlay was
Okay.
completed, which implies we're doing overlays.
Gotcha.
It was all inclusive in the motion.
Plus, you have to continue testing after the overlay's put on there, be sure it's down to 0 or close to it.
Awesome.
Okay. The way I look at it, we have two key priorities. One of them is Robert's, and one of them is mine. Robert's is to make sure our kids and our school staffs are safe. Mine is to make sure that everything that happens and everything that has happened and everything that will happen is communicated clearly, comprehensively, accurately to our key audiences, and there are two of those. One is our internal audience. That's the people who work in these 4 schools. The second one is our parents who have kids in these 4 schools. So when we started looking into this, I was surprised at how little there was out there. I was talking to Maggie earlier. There are 5 or 6 states that seem to have run across this: Arizona, Oregon, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, New Jersey. But it seems like the news coverage stopped at the state line. How many of you had heard anything about this issue before today? So, in looking at that, we started doing a lot of research. I've been in Robert's ear, and we started planning. I first looked for guidance from the state. As Robert mentioned earlier, there is no statutory authority for DHEC to look at indoor air quality. DHEC looks only at outside pollution, those sorts of things. And the South Carolina Department of Education's school facilities office didn't seem familiar with it. So we had to go to other states and look for other states in terms of guidance and what they had done. So the first thing that we did was do a little research, and then we pulled together the principals, Mr. Payne, of all 4 schools. 3 of them are here today. Carol Ingram is giving a presentation this afternoon at Summer Institute, was not able to be here. But we have had email consultations, we've had phone calls, and they actually came over here and sat down with us in facilities, and we game planned a communications plan, and that essentially kicks off. We were waiting to see what the board was going to do today, and so the plan kicks off, and we push that button this afternoon, and I'd like to walk you through that. There's going to be a news release. Obviously, that's the starting point. Everything is based on a Q&A that we have done in recent days. That will be part of a dedicated web page that will be on the district website this afternoon, and every school will link into that. So if you go to Robert Smalls International Academy, that same information will be on their website that's on the school district's website. And that'll include an overview, it'll include a Q&A. We're working on a Spanish language version of that. It'll include the entire testing report, the Terracon report that you received today, archives to additional information from the CDC and ATSDR and some other groups. And we're going to keep a running chronology of everything that happens as we move forward, so you can go ahead and look back. Every communication we send, those sorts of things will all be archived. Social media posts will start today. They will all point to the website. So Twitter obviously is a very short snapshot, but it will point to, and by point to I mean link to, the more complete information on our website. There will be direct communication to parents. That starts tonight. The principals have worked with me on a robocall script. That will be, Ms. Gregory Smalls, you've mentioned this before, not everybody has a computer, but we have 22,000 people are on that phone list. So the robocall script will again refer them. If you want more information, it's on the website, but there also will be a letter, a voluminous letter, that will go out to parents in those schools next week, and that will go out in English and in Spanish. So they'll know, even though there's not a ton of information in the robocall they'll get tonight, they'll know that more information is coming. We're also going to schedule meetings, not really a town hall, but meetings in each school where parents can come in, gather information. Robert and I will go, the principals will be there, and they will also be able to ask questions at those meetings that haven't been covered. Hopefully a lot of it's going to be covered by what we've got that's going to be posted this afternoon. We're also going to meet with the principals, with the staffs at each school. That's an important meeting as well. So those are separate. One school-based meeting with staff, one school-based meeting with parents, and we're going to set those up with the principals and schedule those as quickly as possible. The other thing we've done is that we've retained Terracon on an ongoing basis. Robert is a civil engineer. My background is in communications. Neither one of us knows a whole lot about the technical questions that you folks have asked today. So that's why they're going to stay on with us on an ongoing basis to help us answer any questions that we can't answer in the specifics and the tech of the stuff that we're talking about. One of the things that you've heard a lot about today is micrograms, milligrams, nanograms. That's confusing. They're different units of measurement. When you go out, as parents will do, they're going to go out and they try to do their own research, and they're going to see a lot of these different kinds of measurements. So on our website will be online conversion tables. So if they see something in one piece of material that doesn't make any sense, they can go to the conversion table and say, okay, this report says this many micrograms is safe, and they can click it and transfer it. We're going to use nanograms. The reason we're going to use that is because Minnesota is the only state that we found that has address standards specific to school gyms. Others have talked about your home residence or commercial businesses. Minnesota seems to be, Robert, the gold standard, and so they use nanograms, so we're going to use nanograms, but we're going to give people the tools to make those conversions if they get confused. When you see this stuff and when parents see this stuff, some parents, I'm telling you, are going to say this is overkill. We're going to give them a lot of information. Not everybody's going to want that, but some parents will. So the parents who want a lot of information will have it. It'll be in layers. They can get a simple version, a medium-sized version, or a really detailed version. Our goal and you look around, you'll see the TV stations that are here today. We asked them to come. I didn't tell them why they were coming because I wanted you to get the information first. I just told them that they needed to be here. That's part of our effort to do this in as transparent a way as we possibly can to make sure everybody knows that whatever we know, they know. Our parents need to know that there are going to be errors made. I'm going to make mistakes. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be communicated, but we're going to fix those mistakes. They're going to be errors of omission rather than errors of commission. And so the TV folks are here. We're going to walk them over to the Islands Academy gym so they can actually see what one of these gymnasiums looks like. You can actually stick your finger down in the gym I did the other day and feel it give a little bit so you can see from an athletic perspective why this material for a long time was the gold standard for gymnasiums. That's pretty much all I have. Does anybody have any questions about communications?
I thank you very much, Mr. Foster, for getting out in front of this, for informing the parents. Also giving information on how they can convert nanograms to algebraic problems that they can figure out. So thank you for getting out in front of this for our parents, students, and community members. Thank you for that. And they can make a decision. They will be more informed. And the more that we use our technological entities, the more our parents, I think, that they would know that we're on top of things here in the Beaufort County School District.
Audrey?
I would just like to ask that we include the clip of the presentation we received today, because I think he did such a great job in explaining it in terms that I could understand and relating it to his standard of his own family, and I believe that is a very important part of the message that we ought to have out there. So I would ask that you take the video from today and include it on Facebook, social media stuff, and on the website for people to click on and view, assuming you have no issue with that.
No, it's actually interesting. Halfway through Andy's presentation, you may have seen me get up and walk out of the room. I walked over to Molly and I said, Molly, we need to have all of this recorded and ready to post as quickly as we can. Because I also thought there was a lot of, he did a really great job.
I'd rather watch that than read all that very technical stuff that I'm not going to understand.
As a communicator, I appreciated his ability to bring things down to a level.
Absolutely,
I figure if I can understand it, almost anybody can.
That was it.
We have 3 principals here today. I don't know if anybody would like to hear from them. They were an invaluable resource to us. The first principal I called was Gretchen Kiefner over at Creative Arts. At the time, we thought that was the only school we had. And 24 hours later, after she had digested the information and done a lot of her own research, she and I initially started sharing information back and forth. And then when we added the 3 additional schools, we brought them in and had those meetings. So the principals have been a terrific resource, and they've revised some of the stuff we've done, especially the communications tools that we're going to kick off today.
I would like to hear from them. We would like to hear from you.
Anything you want to add?
One of the things that I would say is that I think this is either 20 or 21 years in Beaufort County. And I have had, when I first came, there was a mold issue. And I don't know that I felt like it was, and I think because we just didn't have the tools that we have today for communication and getting information out and figuring out what to do. But since, I would say, 19 and a half or 21 and a half, whatever years it is, the information and the transparency that has been shared with me as a principal that I'm able to share with staff has been amazing. And this situation is even more amazing to me because Mr. Foster he was thinking ahead in terms of how do we make people understand this. I think my reaction when you first hear that is you're very concerned, you're very panicked. I have had health issues, so when you say there's something with health issues, right away you get that feeling of what's going to happen here. I would tell you that the information, I agree, is not a lot out there because, again, I did my own, and I think parents will do. I think I followed the trek that they will. And kind of what I've discovered is that there is a science to it. I'm fortunate one of my APs was a science teacher. So she sat and gave the science part of it, which when you understand the science and the degree, I love the example that the gentleman just made about a second and in 32 years, how do you compare that? It makes that information make sense and it's real. I feel like the first priority that was given to this was the whole idea of safety. I feel like the second piece of information was that there wasn't any question, and I called Jim several times because initially we thought I was the only Jim, and I would say, well, could you get the answer to this question? And there it was, the search for the answers, and so I think the information that he has collected is going to be exactly, it's going to fit a lot of different audiences to give correct information and to answer any question that people have. I feel like Hilton Head School for the Creative Arts is a safe place for kids. I caught myself like 4 times today at Summer Institute saying, I love the opening of school. I wouldn't be loving the opening of school if I had any kind of hesitation that I was going to put kids in an unsafe situation. I mean, I don't have any children of my own, so the kids at my school are my kids. To hear the standard that the gentleman doing the tests, it runs through your head. Is this a person that is going to be honest? Is this the person that's going to make me understand his science? And I just feel like Creative Arts is going to open in a safe situation with the kids. I'm anxious to hear what parents have to say, and I think we're going to put some time into making sure that everybody understands and the questions get answered. That's probably the only piece that I have the question mark with is where are my parents and what information, once we put this out there, what else do they need to feel that they've got their kids in the best school in the district?
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. Jennifer Murillo, proud principal at Robert Smalls International Academy. Thank you for allowing us a few moments to share our thoughts. First of all, Robert Smalls is working on being a leader in me school. So one of the 7 habits that come to mind is habit number 1, be proactive. And so we appreciate being in the loop, Mr. Payne, as you said, and being a part of the communications efforts. That certainly puts my mind at ease. As a principal, and as all of you are charged with doing due diligence to ensure that our students are safe, I feel confident that the students at our school and in our district, and these 4 schools in particular, based upon the presentation that was made today, are safe and will continue to be safe. I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening with an open ear, seeking first to understand before being understood, and for making such a swift movement today. Speaks volumes to your commitment for ensuring that our students are safe, and we will continue to work together to do so. So again, thank you.
And our employees.
Correct, yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Gillen. I'm the principal at Islands Academy. I just wanted to share how proud I am to work for the district and how transparent we were with each other in communicating the needs for these floors. And Mr. Foster and, of course, Robert Outing just informing us as principals of what we needed to be informed with and be armed with to educate ourselves of what our floors, what was going on in our buildings, and what we could do to have our parents understand what's going on. And with all of the communication, of course, we can be transparent with our parents and our staff. So we're really excited that our district is working towards that together. And thank you for supporting us.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we close, three things I want to talk about. Number one is, do any board member have any question about policies tomorrow? If you do, give them to Robbins before you leave here tonight. Okay? The other thing is, we need to have a finance committee. And so I am going to ask Mr. Scrivenger, Mr. Payne,